Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for a wonderful workshop. My name is Simone Herbin, and I'm the Outreach Coordinator at GreenThumb for Gardens in East and Central Harlem. And GreenThumb is the part of the Parks Department that supports all of our wonderful community gardens. I know we have a lot of people from our community gardens here in the chat, so welcome. Thank you for joining us. Today, we're going to be focusing on fruit tree care with the Open Orchard in partnership with the Trust for the Governor's Island. We'll be having Sam Van Aken from Open Orchard, who's out on Governor's Island, give us lots of information about how we can take care of our fruit trees that are dotted all throughout the city. We also have Brennan here with the Trust for Governor's Island. So a few housekeeping rules for us today is because we want to make sure we can share this workshop with everyone, we're going to ask you all to say muted. If you have any questions, comments, thoughts, you're welcome to share them in the chat. And my colleague Eric will keep track of all of our questions and we can talk about them towards the end of the workshop. So please stay muted. And if you have any questions, you can share with us. And as I mentioned, we are recording the workshop. So if you would like to turn your camera off, you're welcome to do so, but we will be focusing on our facilitators today. So I am going to pass it on to Shane Brennan of the Trust for Governor's Island to give us more information about this wonderful project and all the things we're going to learn today.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Simone, and thank you all for joining us today. I'm Shane Brennan. I'm the Director of Public Programs at the Trust for Governor's Island. I know that many of you have attended previous workshops with us, so welcome back. And for those of you who are new, we're really glad you could join us today. I have the fun job of introducing Sam Van Aken and giving you a little bit of background on his work as it relates to the workshop today. So I realize Sam is a familiar face for a lot of you at this point. I'll make it really quick. He's an artist, an orchardist, and a professor of art at Syracuse University. And his work crosses many fields from agriculture and botany to climatology and history. For the past 10 years or so, Sam's been creating a body of work that involves cultivating and preserving endangered fruit varieties in the form of living trees. His trees of 40 fruit contain 40 different varieties on a single tree, and they've been planted in sites across the country from California to Maine. We at the Trust for Governor's Island have been super lucky to work with Sam on his largest and most ambitious project to date, an entire orchard of hybrid trees that will preserve hundreds of lost, endangered, and rare fruit varieties that were once common in the New York City region but have disappeared with climate change and industrialization. He's been working on this project, which he calls the Open Orchard, for about the past 3 years, growing the trees on the island and getting ready to plant them in the ground this fall. The orchard will open to the public in the spring of next year as one of the Trust for Governor's Island public art commissions. We're really also super excited to be partnering with GreenThumb to distribute another 100 hybrid trees to community gardens across the 5 boroughs, returning the varieties that used to grow in those neighborhoods back into those communities. Today's workshop, as Simone mentioned, focuses on fruit tree care throughout the year. And what's especially exciting is that Sam is actually on site on Governor's Island in the tree nursery where the trees for the Open Orchard are being grown. So you can see them behind him. And in addition to some tips and best practices on tree care, you're also going to get a behind the scenes look at this amazing project before it launches. So I'll wrap up, but I just wanted to mention a couple of other housekeeping things. First, Governor's Island is open to the public until October 31st this year. So please come out and visit the park and the public art projects we have if you're in the area. And second, videos of all the past workshops that Sam has done with us are on our website and the GreenThumb website as well, govisland.org. And we hope you'll come back and join us for future workshops in this series, as well as the opening of the orchard. So with that, I just want to hand it back over to Sam, thank him for his incredible work, and also thank our partners at GreenThumb who've made this workshop series possible. Thank you all for joining us. It's going to be great. Sam, take it away.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Simone and Shane, for the introduction. And unlike our other, God, I don't know if we've done 5 videos now, I have escaped Syracuse. So I am, as Shane mentioned, I am on Governor's Island. And so right behind me, you are seeing cherry trees. So these are all varieties that originated or were historically grown in New York City at one point. So today we're going to talk about fruit tree care, and I thought the easiest way to go about doing that is to organize it around the calendar year. Most people have questions about timing, and so I thought I would go through what my typical schedule is for a year. I should say that this is what I find that works for me. There are many different ways of going about caring for these trees. Everybody seems to have their own sort of schedule for it. But yeah, I thought I'd share mine. So it's kind of hard to think about January, given it was 90 something degrees yesterday, but we'll start in January. In January, what I'm doing is pruning. So the first 3 weeks of January, I try to get all of my pruning done, and that's when the trees are dormant. So they're not having any growth, and it's the time when you can do the most pruning to them and to really try to shape the tree. General advice on shaping or pruning is that you should only remove 1/3 of the branches. If you remove any more than 1/3 of the tree, you can actually do some considerable damage to it. So pruning is the time when I think you do some of the most significant work with the tree, because it's the time that you're shaping it. And generally, fruit trees are grown in one of two different forms. First, there's, they call it the open center, which is the vase shape. So back in the 19th century, what they would do is grow a 6-foot trunk and then have a vase or open center tree that has multiple branches coming out to the side. The other option is to do a central leader, right? So a central leader is just having a central trunk with the branches coming off of it. And they call those branches that come off scaffolding branches. Other things to talk about with pruning are, what do you do with the excess branches? The general advice in terms of fruit trees is to bag, bury, or burn your branches. The reason for that is that if you have a fungus that's on one of the branches, and if you just compost it, you might be introduce that the next year into your nursery or to your orchard. So the best thing to do, I don't know, the thing that I do is I have like a little fireplace, like it's like a little backyard fireplace. I actually will start that in January, and I throw the branches into it as I'm pruning, and then I can add that to my compost pile. Add the ashes to the compost pile. So essentially, January is pretty much dedicated to pruning the trees. The other thing that I'll do in January is when I'll collect Scion Wood. And so what Scion Wood is it's the previous year's growth on the tree. Those will usually be sort of 3-foot sections as last year's growth. And you can tell the difference because it hasn't gone, they say, woody, right? So you can tell the difference in the bark between last year's growth and the previous year's growth. So the year starts out great because by February, you don't have to worry about your fruit trees for a month. After you get your pruning done, you collect the Scion Wood. February, you have the month off to either go on vacation, hibernate, do whatever. But then March gets really busy. So in March, you start the month by receiving your orders for bare root fruit trees. Most trees that aren't sold by a nursery are delivered to you bare root, which means that all the dirt has been taken off of the tree, and it's just the roots are exposed. They're usually wrapped in newspaper, plastic, and shipped to you in a box. What I try to do with those bare root trees is get them into the ground before the end of March. I try to have all the planting that I need done by March 31st. In addition to getting the bare root trees, if you're grafting trees or starting your own nursery, that's when you'll also receive rootstock. At that point, you can take those rootstock and you can bench graft them. Take pieces of the Scion Wood. We have a whole one of the workshops we did was pretty much on bench grafting. So you'll bench graft those varieties. You can let them heal in for a few days, and then you can put them in pots, similar to how all the trees were created behind me. So we had rootstock that arrived beginning of March. I grafted for about a week, and then put them into pots to let them grow for a few years before they're planted out into the orchard. The other thing to look out for, and this is the thing that's kind of unique to urban fruit tree growing, is that within the city, you can have pretty significant microclimates or changes within climate. So what happens is during the day, concrete absorbs heat, and at night it radiates it. So in many locations, you can go from a grown, say like a zone 6 to a zone 7. In places that might even be zone 7, they can be zone 8. So that's going to determine when your tree blossoms. So you're, you can have trees that'll blossom sometimes as soon as mid-March, or the last week in March. And why that's important is that this is probably the most critical thing, is making sure when the trees reach a point called bud swell. So when the tree, right before it blossoms, the buds on it will begin to swell and get enlarged. And the reason why this is so critical is that's the point at which you want to apply copper spray. So I apply copper spray, the copper fungicide, twice a year. I'll do it once right at bud swell and once after leaf fall. And it's important in controlling funguses, because if you don't do it before bud swell, it's hard to manage it throughout the rest of the summer. So what I'll use is, you can use one of those hand pump sprayers. I also just got another one of these backpack sprayers, which are amazing. It's battery powered. If you're doing any more than like 10 trees, I would highly recommend the backpack sprayer. And I'll apply that, apply that before bud swell, particularly if you're growing peaches. Peaches get a disease called peach leaf curl that copper helps prevent it. And if you don't get it before the tree leaves out, it's really hard to manage throughout the rest of summer. I find myself continuously using applications of neem after that. So some of the more common diseases that I run into that copper also helps manage are shot hole disease. So it really looks like somebody took a shotgun and shot it through the trees where the leaves have a bunch of holes in them. I'll run into black knot, particularly on plum trees, if it's been a sort of wet and rainy spring. And that seems to be most of the things I see. Another problem that you'll see on fruit trees is something called gummosis, which that's actually more of a symptom. So that's when the tips of new growth will seem to ooze this clear gum. And it's, from what I found, it's actually more an indication of canker. So, basically what I found is most diseases and insects, it's more of an issue to do with soil than it is, if you have a perfectly healthy tree in really good soil, it's not going to attract pests or, become as easily susceptible to funguses. So that's March, right? You're planting new trees, you're keeping an eye out, at which point you're going to spray copper, which that leads to April. So in April, that's the season when I start doing another form of grafting, which they call top working. So top working is when you're working with trees that are already sort of 3 years old and you're grafting new branches on top of them. So again, that's another workshop that in the grafting workshop, we discuss top working onto trees, but April's the time that I'll really start to do that. basically in April, if you're going to top work the tree, you have from the point of bud swell until, and this is sort of like this old sort of saying, is that until the leaves are the size of a mouse's ear. That's very arbitrary. I've even pushed it a little bit longer till maybe like a cat's ear or something, but basically that gives you a window. It's roughly 4 to 5 weeks that you can do grafting in. Other things that I'll do with my grafts is if I'm top working, I use orange marking tape to mark where the graft is located, and then I'll come back and use these metal tree tags. So you can write on them with a ballpoint pen. And I found these are good for sort of recording grafts and making sure you don't, lose the variety, because once you lose the variety, then you don't know it. We had volunteers that came in and they actually pretty much half of the cherry trees, they removed the tags, and I was like, oh no. So all of those had to be regrafted. Other thing in April is that after petal fall, so that's after the trees have blossomed, the petals fall. If you're noticing any further effects of disease, funguses, that's when I would apply neem oil. So neem oil, it's another organic solution. It's wonderful for trees. It's not very intense or invasive. And really, I mean, I only apply sprays as I see issues. Copper is the only preventative treatment that I'll use on the trees. Everything else is maintained by neem or horticultural oil. So, but I do not apply neem, do not apply any sprays to your trees while they're in blossom, right? Because then you're going to kill bees. So any application of neem or horticultural oil has to be after everything blossoms. So yeah, I mean, I'll use neem and horticultural oil. There's also, I started on another set of trees. There's a orchardist, Michael Phillips, who does holistic tree care. And you can find information on him on the Fedco site. He does mixtures of neem with fish emulsion and a few other ingredients as a way to both nourish and prevent disease within the tree. And I've started to implement that and just sort of try it out to see how it works for me. But I would recommend looking into it. It seems like a really great approach to the trees. So the other thing in May that you're going to look at is you're going to look, by the end of May, you're starting to see the fruit set. So that's seeing, how many fruit drupes that you have on each tree. And, as those start to form, you can actually see them starting to bow the branches on the tree. So you know that, I mean, if those continue to grow, you're going to have further problems. So what you're going to want to do is thin the fruit. So I will typically take off about 50% of the fruit set from a tree in May. And part of that is that I know by taking 50% off that I'm not going to overtax the tree during that growing season. And then that way the tree won't turn into a biennial bearer, right? That's a problem that you can have with the fruit tree, is that if you don't thin the fruit, they will exhaust themselves, growing out growing out so many fruit that they won't have the energy to produce fruit the following year, and therefore they get into this biennial cycle. And thinning it will prevent that. Even if the tree is a biennial bearer now, you can kind of switch it just by thinning it out. I will also remove all of the fruit from trees within the first 3 years. So until it's 3 years old, I will pull all the fruit off of it. And that's to prevent the tree from going into production. Like a tree really changes as it starts to produce fruit. It will put more energy into growing the fruit than it will into growth. And really what you want within the first 3, with apples, even 5 years, is you want those trees growing as opposed to working on fruit. In terms of fertilizer, I'll usually start fertilizing after petal fall with the trees. I usually try to wait until after the last frost. And with my fruit trees, I will fertilize them with fish fertilizer the first 3 years. After that, as the tree ages, the only thing I use is compost. Now, if these are production trees that you need to make money from, that's a completely different story. But I don't need the trees to produce tons of fruit, right? I am more interested in a smaller quantity. So I don't need to juice them with a lot of fertilizer. So that's something to consider. But I usually find the compost will meet my needs. The other thing with compost is it sort of levels out the soil too. Is that it brings the pH of the soil to neutral. And periodically in the first 3 to 4 years, if I'm noticing something wrong with the tree, even before I think of doing any type of application of neem horticultural oil, I will actually test the soil first. I my sort of method for doing it is I'll use 3 of those cheap pH testers that you can get at a hardware store, and I kind of use the average between the 3. If something is really off, I'll actually take a soil sample, and you can have it sent to Cornell, to Penn State, or to Rutgers. So all of these things are taking place in May and the beginning of June. So as you move into June and July, that's when I really start to see insects. And there's a few ways of controlling them. If it's one tree and it's a small tree, I found that one of the best things for aphids and for any type of beetles is to manually control them. Which what I'll do is just walk through the nursery. Any tree that's affected by aphids, you'll find the aphids on the top leaves of the tree. Typically what happens is ants herd aphids up into the top of the tree because they like what the aphids secrete. And you can just walk through and just trim off the top few leaves of the tree to control aphids. Same thing with beetles, is that beetles don't become active until till the sunlight, till the sun comes out and the heat starts. So in the morning and in the evening, they're not moving very much, and you can just knock them off into a bag. There's like all sorts of things you can try with I tried like making beetle emulsion. That was probably the grossest thing I've ever tried. Apparently you can prevent beetles from coming by having having the emulsion, but it's the other thing you can do is just place one of the beetle traps in your neighbor's yard, not yours. So other than these sort of manual controls, the other thing that I'll do for insects is I'll spray horticultural oil. Again, using the sprayer. And the thing with spraying during the summer is that you want to make sure that you're spraying when it's over 50 degrees but below 80 degrees. And you want to spray either in the morning or in the evening. You do not want to spray in the heat of the day, just like you don't want to water in the heat of the day. Because if those branches or those leaves are wet and the sun is beating down on it, it can actually kill out the leaves. So you can defoliate the tree by doing that. So make sure that you are spraying in morning and evening, and that's sort of the June-July plan. Then it's the other thing in June and July is that's when you really begin the battle with birds and chipmunks and woodchuck and all sorts of other things that want to eat your fruit. So that's if birds in particular, they pretty much ravaged most of the cherries, but they did leave us some to eat. But yeah, so June and July are sort of the time it gets very Caddyshack. That's when the fruit are going to start to ripen. So by mid-June, your cherries are starting to come off. You know, by the end of June, first week in July, your apricots are coming. By the end of July, you're into the season where Asian pears will start to ripen. And then by August, you have peaches, plums, summer apples, all starting to ripen. And really, it's a matter of how can you control insects, any type of fungus that will come. And again, it's, you know, horticultural oil for insects and neem oil for the any type of fungicide. So that takes us to August. Actually, the one other thing I should mention with June and July is it's the time when you do summer pruning. So what you're doing with summer pruning is you're removing any branches from the center of the tree. So say you have this vase-shaped tree that has like 3 or 4 scaffolding branches that come off of it, and there's branches that are growing into the center of the tree. You can summer prune those. So anything that's sort of like 1/8 of an inch or smaller, you can just go in and take your pruners and clear out the center of the tree. And what you're doing with that is you're making sure that the tree directs its energy into growth where you want it to, right? Which is generally outward, instead of growing into the center. And what you're also doing is you're creating the opportunity for more sunlight to come down and hit the fruit, which will help it ripen and kind of reach maturity. So summer pruning is pretty critical for kind of serving those two ends. And really that'll kind of continue into August and September. Yeah, what I will do August and September, it's still you're still into gleaning the fruit or collecting it, harvesting it. What I will do with my fruit trees is that I will let the fruit develop until it has its color. You'll know when the fruit reaches its color, and then also depending if they're for fresh eating, I'm gonna wait till the flesh has just a little bit of give to it, and at that point I know that it's reached maturity and it's ready to be eaten. These fruit, I mean, most of the fruit that we've all had or been exposed to is fruit that's been picked 3 to 4 weeks before it's actually ripe. And it's put in a box and shipped to us. And when you actually taste how these fruit are supposed to taste after they've reached maturity, after they've absorbed all of the sugars, it's definitely a world of difference. So for fresh eating fruits, I'll always wait till they ripen right on the vine or right on the tree, and they'll pluck right off of the stem. There are certain cases where you can harvest, say, like apples earlier, and use them for culinary purposes. But for the most part, a lot of it is you know, trying to stay on top of picking the fruit when it's ripe and not let any go to waste. And depending on how many trees you're growing, you know, pawning them off on your friends, anybody that you know will put them to good use. So yeah, from July, August, September, that's, you know, taking care of insects, funguses, trying to manage the pests. And then the next big month on the calendar is October. And October, what I'll do is I'll apply the second round of copper spray when the trees have reached 75% leaf fall. So when the trees have lost 3/4 of their leaves, that is when I'll start spraying with the second round of copper. And the reason I really keep the applications of the copper limited is that copper buildup within soil can really damage the soil. But keeping it limited to twice a year and not using it, I mean, some of the recommendations for copper are to spray like 10 times a year, and I wouldn't want to do that because it'll really you know, mess up the soil chemistry. So I just keep it limited to these 2 applications. Obviously, you can apply it when the trees have lost all of their leaves. I live in Syracuse, so what happens is I have a very small window when it's still warm that I can apply copper. So 75% more leaf fall, apply copper. The other thing I should mention about the copper is that you want to buy copper that's suspended. So it, you know, these copper concentrates are much better than getting the bagged copper or dry copper that you're mixing yourself, because that will actually separate from the water more quickly within the soil and stick to the tree less. The other things that I'm looking to do in October are I'm going to start applying tree guards. So you can get white tree wraps for young trees to wrap them around the trunk of the tree. And what that prevents is girdling. During winter, if we get some snow, you'll find that mice will burrow underneath the snow and they're looking for something to eat. And if they happen upon a fruit tree, I've had instances where they've chewed around the entire trunk of the tree. They've removed the bark, they've removed the vascular system of the tree, and the tree can die. So I'll put on white tree guards. And what white tree guards do is they also prevent a problem called southwest sun injury. So when during winter, the sun will sit lower on the horizon, and when it reaches the southwest point, it has a direct shot at the trunk of your fruit tree. So what can happen is that it can scald the bark on one side of the tree. And to prevent that for young trees, what you'll do is you'll use tree wraps, which serve double duty of preventing girdling and then also southwest sun. Or for larger trees, what you can do is you can paint the trunks white. So you use essentially like a whitewash. The mixture I use is 50% old white house paint, 50% water, and mix up the solution, and you apply it to the trunk of the tree to prevent the scalding. Yeah, other thing in October, I'll plant. Things have changed a lot. I've found that I can even now plant into the first week in December with how erratic the weather has been. But generally, I'll try to plant in October. And planting in October, I really like because it gives the trees extra time for the roots to become established. Basically, the rule is you plant apricots and peaches in spring. Everything else you can plant in that October window. Although I've planted peaches and apricots in the fall with no problem either. So other things that I'm doing in October is I'm making sure that I'm raking up all the leaves. Again, what I'll do with those is bag, bury, and burn. Any of those options. That's just to if there's any fungus that's still on the tree, I'm not composting it and reintroducing it back into my nursery. Other things that I'm doing are ordering rootstock. So I'll order a lot of the big nurseries will require that you get your rootstock ordered by even November. So I'll order rootstock in October. And other things I'm doing, if I have potted trees, I bury them in. So I'll take mulch and build it up on the sides so that the pots don't freeze during the winter. Depending on how many trees that you are growing, one thing you might want to consider is if you have access to 5-gallon buckets that are white. I find that they work pretty well because they aren't absorbing the heat during the summer and actually helps the trees grow a lot more. Then essentially November and December, it's finishing everything you didn't get done in October. Then picking your fall and winter apples and figuring out how to store them throughout the rest of the year. So that's pretty much my year in review. I guess we can go to questions if anybody has any questions.
Yes, Eric, are there any questions from the chat that you would like to share with Sam at this time?
Thank you, Sam. Very informative. From the chat, there was a question about neem oil and what else was mixed with it. I believe it was fish emulsion and horticultural oil.
Yeah, there's I don't know about horticultural oil, but yeah, Michael Phillips, who does that holistic orchard care, uh his solution's a lot more elaborate, but it includes neem oil and fish emulsion.
Okay, thank you. And another
Yeah.
one, can we prune branches now?
You can summer
late
prune. You don't want to prune anything. You can remove this year's growth, right? So it's June now. So what you'll see is about 6 inches of this year's growth. You can remove that, but only from the center of the tree and only in a limited amount. I wouldn't go through and take off anything more than that. Does that make, yeah, I hope that clarifies.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Well,
Be
thank
very
you.
cautious. That's all I'm saying.
Another specific question from the chat. Black aphids on cherry trees. What do we do about that?
Oh, yeah. That is, at this point, neem. I would hit it with neem or horticultural oil. Wait till the evening. And, you know, again, those aphids will all hoard together and get into the center leaves. And, you know, you can save a lot of money on, you know, these organic sprays. The organic sprays, of course, run a little bit more expensive. And, yeah, a lot of times you can just go through and hit the top leaves and you know, the horticultural oil and neem, what they essentially do is they suffocate the insect, and so you don't have to apply it all over the tree. You can just apply it at the top.
And the next question is, around the drip line, what should we be adding to the soil?
After the tree's established, so after the first 3 years, I don't do any applications. You know, if I test the soil and the nutrients are off, I might consider organic fruit tree spikes. But typically I try to remedy everything with compost. And yeah, that would be my strategy for it. Try compost first. If that's problematic, you can apply fruit tree spikes. But yeah, I mean, the typical or the old way of doing it is you would just get a huge bucket of triple 10 and just pour it at the drip line, and the trees would jump. And yeah, but then you're introducing a lot of
and the
phosphate.
same question goes on for when this tree is in a pot. Anything that we would add to the pot?
Yeah, potted trees are a lot different because potted trees don't have access to all the soil. So if I'm growing trees that are potted, eventually I have like a destination for them, right? So I'm thinking 3 or 4, maybe even 5 years out. So I'm not concerned about them producing fruit. So with them, what I'll do is I just nitrogen, right? So I'm just fertilizing them with fish emulsion, and that's it. If I am growing a larger tree in a container, then what I use is a organic fertilizer that has you know, fish emulsion, that has bone meal, feather meal. You know, they can give the tree the nutrients that it needs. With you know, trees in containers for their lifespan, they do take a lot more work.
Got it. Thank you. These questions are coming in fast and furious. So we're in the lightning round here. Um,
All right, I'll see what I can do.
No, that's, I love your answers. It's perfect. What about understory planting for a fruit tree?
Yeah, I do. For me, I like beans. Well, I like beans because I can freeze them. But I find you know, it's good for nitrogen. And yeah, so they are
Perfect.
nitrogen fixing plants. Yeah,
Got it.
clover.
Okay. Now we're moving on to fig trees.
Oh,
So fig trees,
my
we're
weak
up in
spot.
zone 7 right now. And how do you get a fig tree to get through the winter sitting in New York City?
Oh, okay. So this is like really great. This is what I've learned from the Italian community in Syracuse, and there's still some families that do
Yep.
this, where they take the fig tree out of the ground in the fall, they bundle the roots and move it into their basement, and then in May of each year they drag it back out of the basement, drop it into the ground, and they produce these amazing figs all year round. And as the tree grows, like, the idea is that your friend group grows because you need help. But I mean, that's one of the ways you can do it. Other people I know, they take the fig tree and they bend it. So you take it, bend it over, and then you bury the branches.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah. So those are two solutions that might be workable.
Wow. Okay. And let's see here. The next question that I have is, when do you prune plum trees to avoid silver leaf disease?
That's all January. Yeah, I don't really touch plum trees unless it's in January, and try to do all of your pruning then. That's it. I mean, you can summer prune them to some extent, but really you keep that limited.
I got that. Now, a lot of us are trying to grow fruit trees, and we have less than 6 hours of sunlight on that tree due to buildings, shade, and all that other stuff. So what is let's call it a shade tolerant fruit tree?
I don't know.
Partial shade.
That's going to be an experiment. I would say, rather than I would say one thing to look at is, can you bounce light, right? So let's say you have,
I'm sorry, I missed that the little audio glitch. Try a what?
Oh, try to bounce light to it.
Bounce
right?
light.
So
Okay.
what if you painted the wall behind the tree white, right? And then you're going to maximize the amount of light that it can get.
Got it.
If that's an option, right? I would try those experiments. I would also say almost all fruit will do well in this climate, right? All temperate fruit are going to do well in this climate. So it's more a matter of how can you alter the conditions or environment that it's growing in.
Okay. And another one of what your listeners here or viewers has asked, do you recommend mycorrhizal application after the tree is in place, or would you feed the root in any way to apply that?
Yeah, I mean, that's obvious. That's something that I'm still doing like a ton of work and a ton of looking at. One of the things that I do is I use a hardwood mulch that, as it essentially composts, it encourages that mycorrhizal growth within the trees. I've tried it on they have biopacks for fruit trees. I've tried it and it's worked really well with encouraging the colonization on the roots and the spreading to other trees. So I'm all for it. Yeah, but I'm not an expert on it. I'm very much a neophyte when it comes to understanding all those properties.
Well, you're way out in front of many of us here, so we're all listening. And yet another question here, lemon trees in zone 7B. Or would
Sounds
you
like
put that in a
you.
pot and bring it in the wintertime?
Yep. Yeah. I'd say build an orangery. That's like my dream, is to actually build one. I saw them in Versailles and I was like, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen in the world. Because they had train tracks that would lead into these enormous glass houses that they would heat with fires that were underneath the glass house.
Oh my
And
gosh.
it was all to grow like 20 oranges. It's like amazing.
That is something. Yeah, Versailles is indeed amazing. There are 500 gardeners working in Versailles for the last 200 years. You never see them in the photographs, but yeah, they do amazing stuff.
Well, it's funny because apparently that's what bankrupted the French government under Louis XVI, and it still continues to bankrupt the French government.
Oh,
Which
those
is
high-priced
amazing.
gardeners. But anyway,
Yeah,
moving
yeah.
on and being conscious of our time, let's move over to peach leaf curl. And at what
Yeah.
point of the season would help be needed, and how would you go about that?
Yeah, I mean, that's where I that copper spray that happens at bud swell. You do that and it's gonna prevent the leaf curl. If that leaf starts to go green tip and it's already forming leaves, it's already too late. And so really the only thing that I found effective, you are not curing the problem at all, but you're trying to keep the tree healthy, is regular applications of neem that are sort of holding it at bay until the following year, right? So once the leaf curl hits and it gets bad, you're just trying to keep the tree alive till it goes dormant, and you can get that application of copper in the fall and the one in the spring, and let it come back a new tree.
Okay, thank you. Moving on, and the questions still are rolling on in here. We got a little bit of time left. One of our viewers here has 2 dwarf apple trees. They're 3 to 5 years old, and some succulents were planted underneath that apple tree. Does this take the nutrients from the tree, is the question.
Yeah, I mean, anything that you have planted under the tree is going to compete with it, right? Unless it's doing something, unless it's nitrogen fixing, dynamic accumulator, one of those two, anything that you plant underneath it, it's going to steal nutrients that are available to the tree.
Wow, okay. And another viewer has asked, the months that you had listed as to activities, is that for Syracuse time or is that for New York City time?
Good question. That's New York City time. Yeah. But again, what I would say is that can all be dependent on your location. Generally, these trees here on Governor's Island are going to blossom the first week in April, maybe the last week in March. But depending on what your location is, the buildings that are around you, that could be 2 to 3 weeks earlier.
Wow. Okay, thank you. And the last question we have right now is, could you, you mentioned coconut coir when planting, would you use coconut coir when planting new trees? And what do you mix in with it when planting?
Yeah, I mean, I would, if it were more available. One of the things with coconut coir that makes it great is that, say like California, somewhere where, you can get, it's a byproduct, right? So it's what the coconut sheds, and it becomes a substitute for peat moss, right? Typically, for soilless mixes, what you'll do is you'll mix peat moss, vermiculite, perlite, and compost together. And that's my general recipe for potted trees or container grown trees. And if it's economically viable or you're getting it for free, you can substitute the coconut coir instead of the peat moss. But as we are closer to Canada, I think environmentally the peat moss is still better. If that makes sense.
Okay, thank you very much. And there was also a thanks for mentioning the myochlore mediation suggestion. Looks very interesting. I'm going to move the mic over to Simone, and you can pick it up from here.
Thank you so much, Eric, for tackling all of those questions. I know that lots of people are very, very interested in their fruit trees that are in the ground and how to make sure they're able to take care of them and reap all of the benefits. So that also includes me. So yeah, we're at time. So if anyone has one last burning question, you can add it to the chat. And until then, I'll let everyone know this workshop, along with the other workshops from the Open Orchard series, are on our YouTube page, and you can get more information about them and continue to find more information about GreenThumb workshops. So I want to say a big thank you to Sam and to Shane and to the Open Orchard Project, as well as to the Trust for Governor's Island. And to see that, we have one last question. I'll throw it in here. How tall do typical fruit trees get, or is it entirely up to how they're pruned?
It's more dependent on the rootstock, right? So if you're buying a fruit tree, it's really good to know what the rootstock is, because that controls the eventual height.
Great.
Yeah, along with your pruning.
Of course. And people want to know, when can they come to the orchard?
Oh, next spring. So spring of 2022, it'll actually be planted on the island, and I look forward to seeing everybody out here, but then also to bring all these trees to the community gardens too. It's yeah, I'm so looking forward to working with all of you. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. And I hope everyone has a good afternoon. And once again, you can get more information about this workshop, which will be online next week, as well as other workshops that have happened in the past. So thank you again, Sam, and thank you again, Shane and Eric, and everyone who came today. I hope it was very useful, and excited to see what we're able to get from our fruit trees this year. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well done.
Thanks.